Oh, greetings and salutations, everybody. How am I doing here? How's everybody doing? Recording this on what is it, Wednesday? 8th of December. Coming in hot and heavy. I thought I would do something, I don't know if I would say completely different, somewhat different, a little bit different. I've done, Reddit read-ups roundups where I will go through and do some Reddit posts. I did some blog posts that I had stored up in my pocket, which I use to keep hold of articles that I want to read. In this case, this is kind of a little bit similar to that, in that a couple things popped up in my various feeds. I had some thoughts on them. I was curious what your guys' thoughts would be on these, so I put them aside. I only have 2 of them for this one. And if we have time left over, we'll see how long it takes. Maybe we can talk about other stuff. But I thought these might be good things to discuss. I can give my thoughts. I'm ready, willing, and would love to hear your thoughts on these 2 issues. I named them in the title of the stream. They are OSR Heresy and Punished for Role-Playing. OSR Heresy is the name of one of the blog posts, probably the first one we'll go over. And then the other one is, and I saw the article first. The article referenced a tweet, which referenced a Reddit post. Punished for Role-Playing was the title of that Reddit post. Apparently, when it got published, when someone commented on it and threw a screenshot of it on Twitter, it caused some hubbub, which I totally missed. Someone wrote an article about that. That's when I caught it, but I think there's a couple of interesting things to unpack there, so I thought we could take a look at. Lincoln says, my heresy sense is tingling. Indeed. So without further ado, that's the best segue I think I could even think of. If I could think of it, let's look at that first one, which is called OSR Heresy. I posted links to these in the show description, in the show notes, if you're on YouTube. Some of the other places I stream, I think if you're happen to be on Facebook and you're in here, you can get it there as well. I don't have it handy to throw in the chat, but they're there. The links are there. This was posted on, I guess this is, see, here it is. So this was posted a while back. I guess it must have gotten resurfaced because I got it in one of my feeds. It seemed interesting, but it looks like this is not news. This person's idea has been floating out in the ether for a while. It's new to me. I guess we'll go with that. This is posted from the Dreams of Mythic Fantasy blog way back in March of 2019. OSR Heresy. Here's a very recent post I made on Reddit. It addresses something I've been meaning to write about anyway, so I'm reposting to the blog. There's certainly some good suggestions in the thread so far. Now, one of the reasons I run first edition is because the characters are a bit sturdier than they are in BX, OD&D, etc. Here's the thing. Here's where I disagree with OSR orthodoxy. The idea of quote-unquote combat as a fail state, unquote. The problem being, I've never run in 35 years of running the game, had someone at my table who didn't like combat, who didn't want combat. I'm sure they're out there. And yes, there are a lot of things that happen in D&D that are exciting and fun and don't require the combat tables. But combat is where it's at. Take every advantage you can, plan, play smart, use every advantage and strategy, be cautious and judicious by all means. But at the end of the day, who wants to play in a D&D game where you get to level 5 and have never killed an orc? Or have never fought in a dangerous, fever-pitched battle that you survive by the skin of your teeth and get to brag about for months or years to come? Unless you've created a super tame dungeon and some real quiet random tables, combat and combat death is going to happen, and blaming the characters for being too lame to avoid it is unreasonable and undesirable. Few wanted to avoid it in the 80s, and few want to avoid it now. I've never had a party play through G1 and just, talk to the giants. I've never had them trick the giants into leaving, though admittedly, that would be pretty cool. G1 is a slaughterfest, and fun as all hell to run or play through. My son is 15, and he and his friends play first edition /Osric. They're also into super hard and retro video games, like Spelunky. Ever play Spelunky? Spelunky is hard, unforgiving, and there's no save function. A lot of things can kill you with one hit, and it takes skill and determination to get anywhere with that bloody game. Not every young person wants a game that hands everything to them. There are always going to be gamers who want the hard stuff. Some decent death rules are desirable. Nothing as easy as, say, 5th edition, but something more forgiving than death at 0. And make resurrection plausible by at least 5th level or so. Charge out the nose for it, use it to force quests, whatever. But once res is on the table, characters get a lot more relaxed with the idea of PC death. At that point, a TPK is what they worry about. Old school play is probably never going to be for more than a relatively small subsection of RPG gamers. And that's okay. Get out there, talk to people, recruit people totally new to the game, play it via internet if you've got no other choice. It isn't bad, it still feels like playing D&D. And do remember this, 3 or 4 years from now, the players are unlikely to remember much about the time they casually dispatched the Lizard King's guards after putting them to sleep, then sneaked into his treasure room while Mr. Lizard was busy eating lunch, stole his treasure chest, and coolly sauntered out of his dungeon. What they're going to remember forever is the firefight, down to the wire, 1 or 2 PCs down, all-out melee, which they won with grit, daring, and a timely lightning bolt or critical hit, finally killing that bastard lizard and looting his treasure, limping out of the dungeon and calculating how much they would have to spend on getting a fellow PC resurrected. Okay, so before I get into that, the chat got some stuff in there. Bob Mossel says, I question that initial premise that the OSR's orthodoxy is combat as a fail state. Yes, Bob, you're kind of reading my mind. I've never actually heard people say, I think, so we'll get into that. But yes, I agree with you. Fluffy the Griffin says that they responded to this Reddit post. Oh, well, you're looking at the same thing, I guess. Terrence says, I could use a glass of that hard stuff. And then Fluffy the Griffin also says, I think the author missed the point by a lot. And then Elfbait says, hi. Hey, Elfbait. Yeah, so let's unpack this a bit, right? Because there's a couple things. On this idea that the OSR says that combat is a fail state. I'm not sure where he's getting that. I think we can look at it in some different ways. I think there's maybe they mean that this combat as the last resort, which we do see a lot in the OSR. And I kind of, and I don't really disagree with that. Combat is the toughest road to hoe as a character, at least at low levels when you have nothing. Combat is just tough. You want to get through the dungeon to the other side, whatever. Of all the ways you get there, the one that's the hardest, the most dangerous, the most likely to end up killing you is combat. So maybe you can look at it that way and say, well, of this scenario, combat is a fail state. But I don't think that's what anybody means. I've never heard anybody putting it like that. And I think this other idea that because combat in the OSR is maybe framed as not being your best option doesn't mean, or isn't to say that people don't enjoy combat. I've never heard anyone say, like, I hate combat. I think the things, and at least the kind of games that I enjoy, it's not that I ever hated combat. What I hated more is that when combat was a foregone conclusion, where I had no choices, I've played in games, and they weren't bad games necessarily. They certainly had a certain style to them, but it was essentially moving from combat to combat, and you just knew, okay, you're moving to the next area, what the combat's going to be. And I had no choices. I didn't have any choices on trying to set up, like he was talking about I don't know if it's a he, but like they're talking about in this blog post, setting all your things up, getting all your pieces where you want them to be, trying to maximize your advantages, minimize your disadvantages, and boom. But there's games, and I've played in some of them, and you don't get to do that. You're basically putting yourself, your GM is putting you in the position that you're in, right? You're, we got to get from town A to town B. Okay, well, on the way to town B, you have to pass through a narrow valley with high cliffs on either side, and this is where this ambush is going to take place. And you have no choice but to be, you might think, well, if we knew this was the road, maybe we'd look for other roads. Nope, it doesn't matter. You're ambushed, and now you're going to have to fight through this kind of combat this way. As opposed to using a hex crawl kind of thing. I'm like, okay, well, the road's the easiest way, but oh, by the way, it passes through this place that they call the hot gates, where you can only pass one abreast, and it's really bad, but it's fast. And then we make that choice. Okay, we're going to take the hot gates, but yeah, we're not liking it, or we'll try to go the other way around. And if we have to fight something, we're not going to get stuck like we'd end up doing in that combat. So I don't think, I guess, number one, that I've heard people say, like, oh, you shouldn't never have combat, or I hate combat, or combat is undesirable. I think it's more to get players to look at the fact that they shouldn't fight everything just because. And I think even the reason why we say this wouldn't have been something that I would said back in the 80s. If I was in junior high school or middle school, whenever it was when I first started playing this game, and you were the new kid at the school, and we're getting together to play D&D, I wouldn't have some big speech about, oh, by the way, combat is brutal and this, that, the other. The reason why I have that conversation with, say, the guys I'm theoretically playing our home game tonight, is because they're used to a very different kind of game. What they may have played, what they may have heard about, may be very different. So I want to make sure they know, hey, when you fight stuff, this is a life or death thing, and think about it. Think about what you're doing before you just run in there and fight stuff. And I've been a player in groups where people didn't think about stuff and they all died in the combat. Not that they didn't like it, but that it is what it is. And trying to set up your players for success, I might want to say, hey, just think about it. But even my players, they understand all the stuff about combat. They still love getting into combat and hacking stuff apart. So that's where I'm coming from. Let's see what the chat's got going on here. Brian Smith, hey Brian, says, isn't combat just a circumstance that things can always devolve to, the common denominator? Yeah, absolutely. Terrence says, I've died to traps more often than combat no matter what the edition or game. Yeah, traps can be rough. And then Bob Mostel says, upon reflection, I guess there is the OSR idea that monsters are not balanced, and I suppose there's the old game combat is sport versus war. Yeah, I think so. But in this case, I think this person is saying, hey, look, people revel in the combat as war, which I agree, right? You're coming up with these great plans, and I think there's this, maybe he's just looking at it for all the, I have a feeling this is coming from that place of people saying you shouldn't just drive towards combats as players. I haven't really heard it from the GM side, people saying, oh, you shouldn't put combats in your game. I think it's more, the advice people get to players is, hey, don't just run towards combats, which is, I think, really what they're trying to say is, as Bob, as you mentioned, combat as sport versus combat as war, that drive you to have that sink in. That this combat as war, not as a sport. Lincoln says, you see a dragon, roll initiative. I want to try to talk to the dragon. You can try on your turn, breathe fire. The one thing I will say about that, Lincoln, is I agree with what you're saying, but I will often have the players roll initiative when timing is important. Of course, in my chance, it might be you see a dragon, and then you may have some players who want to breed. The dragon may want to breed. The other players want to do that. And I do have that a little bit of luck over. I don't want it to devolve into who happens to speak fastest. So I will use initiative and say, okay, to put it in some terms, let's say if the party enters the lair of the dragon, they see the dragon's one eye begin to open. Maybe I rolled surprise and no one was surprised, whatever. And then I'll say, okay, roll initiative, and I'll make sure to note, this doesn't mean that we're just going into fighting, but what it means is that timing is important. If the guy who wants to just attack, and you have one player who's, say, the diplomat, one player who just wants to kill, well, who gets to determine how this encounter goes? Initiative will decide, and maybe the dragon and whatever its reaction role will also talk about, have a say in what happens. Now, nothing says the author seems to think that each encounter you don't fight results in one less fight in your game. Not true, because your limiting factor is real world time. Yes, and I think the other thing is the author is underplaying the excitement of, let's say, doing that sneak through. I think that sneaking example they gave at the end, when he says 3 or 4 years from now, the players are unlikely to remember about that time that they put the guards to sleep and did all this sneaking. I disagree with that. Maybe in some groups that's true. I think when you were able to put together a really kick-butt plan that circumvents a GM's, or at least what you think is what the GM wants to run, that gets remembered a lot. I mean, there's all these, how many times have I gone on Reddit and seen, like, look how we upended this encounter. We totally did this weird thing, or it was unexpected, and it just bypassed half the mission. No, people love that stuff. I don't know where this guy's maybe hanging out. This person's hanging out where they haven't seen those examples. So I disagree with that. I think people remember both kinds of stories a lot. I think the real thing is that what can we take away from these things is that it really depends on the power of your actions. That yes, you can go in and have this drag out fight that's exciting and turns on this or that, or you can come up with real stuff. But it's that stuff that you make happen through your ingenuity, through your cleverness, that you're going to remember. Like the time I came up with an awesome plan, or the time we did whatever, like those things are all going to be memorable to me. No, nothing says you can get through 3 rooms fighting in each, or get through 10 rooms and having 3 fights in that time. Yeah, absolutely. Right. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. It's kind of like when people say, oh, well, it's just a fighting game. No, it's a game that has fighting in it, and the fighting is important, no doubt, but it isn't just a game of fighting things. And part of that whole combat as war of everything is you really want to pick which combats you get into, if you can. And the combats you can't pick are the ones that are most likely to get you, because you're usually at a disadvantage. Brian Smith says, I think players have to learn that there's more to the game than combat on their own terms. They will keep rushing into combat and going through character creation until they are sick of it. Yes, I think I think having that, if you have players who are like that, who are just running and gunning in every combat they can, I think the best thing you can do is let it kill them. I think too many times a GM will hold their punches and say, oh no, this is a new player, this is a new group, I don't want to have this kill them because this, that, and the other. But what you're doing is you're teaching them. When you're taking a new group of new players and you're sitting down and you're playing with them and you're refereeing a game for them the first time, you are teaching them. You're teaching them what the game is about. And if you teach them that they can run ahead like idiots and the dice are somehow going to magically save them, or they'll magically always be able to pull it out by the skin of their teeth, then they're just going to keep running ahead like idiots, and that will be the game. If you teach them that running ahead like idiots is bound to have them die like idiots, then they're probably going to figure it out. Maybe they'll decide, hey, this isn't the game for us because all we want to do is run ahead like idiots. Fair enough. Assuming that that's not the case, they're going to say, okay, maybe we got to come up with a new plan. In the game that I played in, my thief was the only survivor of a almost TPK. Everyone else got TPK'd, and because they all run into this combat. No one thought about anything. They just running ahead into the teeth of the enemy, and they just got wiped out. And I survived because I did the opposite. I was tried to play it very safe, very conservative, defensive, if you will, given our circumstances. And the next time they made up new characters, they came back. The next combat they got into, guess what? They didn't run straight ahead into the teeth of the enemy. They learned. And you got to give your players a chance to learn. If you're afraid that they're going to leave the game because their first strategy or lack thereof, it doesn't work for them, then you probably haven't explained it enough in rules in your session 0, and maybe it's just not the game for them at all. Nothing says, I also disagree with the idea that your players will only remember combat. You mean your players only remember combat? Sounds like as a DM, you're only good at combat. I mean, maybe. Who's to say, right? I don't want to start disparaging the Dreams of Mythic Fantasy blog poster. But yeah, I just think that, look, you can go on to Reddit, Facebook. People really enjoy all the stories. Anytime players feel that they get over on the GM in some way, whether it's through combat, whether it's through avoiding combat, that's usually a feather in their cap. So the idea that if there wasn't some combat that they forget, maybe it's just this person's experience, but I think they haven't read enough posts, or they're not hanging around. Maybe they're hanging around too much into just the GM only groups and forums, and not other ones. Authors hang out in the strawman department. Yeah, I don't mind it too much because he's not trying to write a legal treatise. It's just an opinion piece. Fluffy the Griffin says, yeah, on the OSR subreddit discussion, I pointed out that combat is a fail state, meaning that negotiations have broken down. It doesn't mean that combat in and itself is a state of failure. Right. And it also doesn't mean that combat's not fun, but sometimes you want to have the fun that you hopefully want to survive, and look, if we're trying to in any way kind of simulate, have some fun with the stories, combat usually is the thing that you're trying to do other things about. Stories of Conan and Sword and Sorcery, of course they have combat in it. But Conan usually isn't trying to fight things unless he has no other, out. It's not just running from combat to combat to combat to combat. Bob Monsell says, Leroy Jenkins, exactly. And then Brian Smith says, and that's how players gain experience points. Yep, pretty much. Being killed is a great learning experience, especially if it's just a character and not yourself. Fluffy the Griffin says the NPC should also be considered as people by the DM. Treating monsters as video game encounters that only fight is also a problem. Yes, absolutely. Right. You have to allow for things to play out. And I think this is going to be a good segue into the other piece because it kind of gets into that aspect of it. But yes, there has to be this concept of one, which I used to have to try to point out to GMs when I was a player. It used to be a little frustrating to me because I'd be watching combats. This is probably during mostly the 3.x phase of things. We're getting these combats, and at a certain point, I think that really, if I could cap, and I've always thought of it would be possible to do this in some way. Say combat should be no more than 3 or 4 rounds. I feel like after that, if nothing is changing, I think it's really starting to get stale. I think happens. Let me break down my kind of ideal combat. Round 1, you're doing initial maneuvering and kind of sizing up. You're positioning yourself. You're trying to, and the enemy's positioning themselves. You're trying to figure out maybe what your angle is going to be, what your angle of attack is. Then 2, you're going to make that contact with the enemy. Potentially, it could happen in round 1 if people charge ahead, but you kind of figuring out what you're going to do, sort of contact with the enemy or maybe continued contact with the enemy. Then you kind of get a sense of what that enemy's like in that contact. Are they strong? Are they weak? Whatever. What kind of stuff do they have? Do they have a lot of spells? Or they have whatever they have? What are their abilities? That kind of thing. Then 3rd round, you're making that whatever your adjustment is. Okay, there's the spellcaster we need to take down, or there's whatever we need to do. Kind of do that, and then maybe 4th, and you can break this out another 4th. You make the adjustment, and then you bang it from there, right? Okay, well. We do this thing now. We make this counter move, and then the enemy makes a counter move, and then maybe there's a 5th round, and after that, it's kind of after that, I think there's not a whole lot left other than rolling more dice, At that point, you've kind of seen what the enemy can do. The enemy is seeing what you can do. So now decisions, in my mind anyway, this is decision time. And I think for most part, enemies shouldn't be fighting to the death, which is kind of where even though I didn't mention, it's kind of where I'm starting this whole little, I don't know, mini rant or whatever about. After that 5th round or somewhere in there, okay, the enemies should be deciding, can we take these guys in a way that's not going to kill us both? We don't want to fight to the death. Maybe there's there's the odd circumstance where you have cultists who are just so fervent that they just retreating or do anything else, doesn't matter. But I think almost every other time, undead, oozes, constructs, sure, they're going to keep on fighting. That's part of what makes them dangerous, is they're going to keep fighting. But taking those kind of edge cases out of the way, can we take them down? You're going to kind of know. You're as a player, you're rolling dice. Shoot, I have to roll an 18, 19, or 20 to hit this guy. Oh gosh. I can't count on that's, 15% chance, right? 18, 19, 20, 15% chance of me hitting this guy. I don't know how many hit points I have, and they're murdering me. So I got to figure out how to get out of this. Or the opponent is thinking, this guy is torching me, and it's really hard for me to hit him. I got to figure out something. So I think after that 4th or 5th round, some decision should be made of, we either have to start to retreat. What's our objective? If our objective was to protect somebody else, then we got to figure out, whatever our objective is, we have to make some change. Either we know we're not going to be able to take this hill or hold this door, so now we got to try to move back to the other door, or change our objective some way. And if our objective's just lost, we were defending the Goblin King ran away in round 1 or something, or whatever, or they killed him already. Then it's like, okay, it's time to sue for peace, lay down our arms, something like that. When you get much over that, however many rounds, I think I was at 5, and you could maybe tack another one on there, depending, or you could say 4 or 5, somewhere in there. Unless you're really pushing, having interesting decision spaces open up, there really aren't any. The fighter is standing in their one spot. And I think this is even worse in the modern game than in the old one, because of things like opportunity attacks, which really kind of lock people down into the space that they're in. I'm just gonna roll, and then it's just attrition. And to say we could cut out that attrition, I would, like it a lot more. But I think that's the kind of thing, to me, that's the boring part. Like, combat is fun when you have all those choices. When it's not fun is when you're in that kind of slog sort of phase. I don't know where I was going with that, but that's my spiel on that. Linkian says, so I'm a player in a 4E game right now, and most frustrating thing is that every encounter is combat, and every combat takes several rounds. Yes, and this is the problem with 4th edition, I think, Prime. And I enjoyed 4th edition. I had fun playing my Warlord in 4th edition when other players cooperated. I think there were some issues with classes like the Warlord, which sort of, if they don't require, they really are helpful when other players want to play that kind of game with you, where you're helping them, they're helping you. And when players, you'd make, hey, I'm going to do this, and this will allow you to do that, and then they go rogue, and so on your turn, you're kind of left holding the bag, was not so much fun. But I don't really blame the rules for that as much as the kind of other flaky player who changes their mind or whatever. But they could take forever. And then you start thinking about it's because you're trying to ration your powers. You either get in this thing where you want to blow all your powers right away, because why not just get through them, and then you have no powers left later, or you're trying to ration out your powers, which I think I made the mistake of probably being an overly. I was trying to ration them too much, and so you end up in just those your at will powers over and over again. And yeah, it just ends up, it can be, I feel like 4th edition is probably the king of just, combats can be a slog. And I think in Essentials edition, they tried to fix it. I never played Essentials, so I'm not sure how that worked out for them. Flavor the Griffin says, seeing any fight caught on camera in real life, and there are a few punches thrown, a gun is displayed, and the fight ends in a hurry with the weaker side realizes they're losing or gets fireballed. Yeah. Not Jerry Maguire. It's just Jerry Maguire. Jack Reacher, the first Jack Reacher movie with Tom Cruise, which I feel like is criminally underrated, by the way. If you like, I don't know, sort of thriller type movies, Jack Reacher, really good. And there's a great scene, maybe a third, kind of towards halfway point of Jack Reacher, where these guys, probably about a third, these guys basically ambush him at a bar, and it's clearly a setup. But they want to fight. They basically make some excuse to fight him, and there's like 6 or 8 of these guys. So he goes outside and he's like, okay, and you can see for him, it's a foregone conclusion. He's like, okay, you guys are really going to do this. And the other guys are all like pumped. They're thinking like, yeah, we're just going to, you're just some dude. We're going to beat you to a pulp, and that's it. And then Jack Reacher breaks it down. He says, okay, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to knock him down fast. there's going to be one or two of you who are going to be, hard ass and stay with him. And there's maybe one other guy. And then the rest of you are going to run, and they kind of look at him, they scoff, but sure enough, he does it. And I think one extra guy stays, and Reacher's like, really? Like, for real? And then, he kind of takes him down, and then the cops show up. But it's a really great scene that illustrates that point pretty well about, how fast, how quickly over. Now, of course, we got to keep in mind, right? Combat at 6 to 10, depending on edition, 6 to 10 seconds around. So you can always rationalize that even if you end up at round 10, you're only at 60 seconds. You're only at a minute long, right? Which feels like nothing. But I still think that to the extent that you can, and maybe I should just do a video on it. I don't even know. I don't think I've done this one already about really thinking about that combat in terms of when do your interesting decisions dry up, and when those interesting decisions dry up, then it's time to rethink the objectives of everybody, because at some point you really do know it's going to come down to either I'm going to get lucky on the dice, or they're going to get lucky on the dice, or no one's going to get lucky, and I can see which way the wind's blowing. You either know, okay, I got a better chance to hit them than they have to hit me, in which case I can just keep fighting, or they have a better chance to hit me than I have of them, in which case I should stop fighting. And once you kind of get a sense of that, why play out all those dice rolls? It's probably more interesting if you throw a monkey wrench in the works, like they surrender, or they make a break for it, and they all run in different directions, or they pull out a hand grenade and then just, run at you, whatever it may be. Brian Smith says, talking to Lincoln, I've seen lots of groups that just have an unspoken agreement that D&D equals combat after combat after combat. Yes, there are certainly GMs who play that way. I've played in those games. Fun is the big thing, right? If that's what everybody likes, that's what everybody likes. I think for me, I enjoyed it for a bit, and he definitely got into having a lot of tactical battlefields, which was nice. But I do remember being frustrated by the fact that I didn't have choices. I didn't have choices on where I'm going to fight, who I'm going to fight, and really how I'm going to fight it. It was all about, I was going to get positioned somewhere, kind of Final Fantasy Tactics, right? You're playing Final Fantasy Tactics, a game that I love, but of course it's a computer game, so I give it a lot more slack in terms of setting the scene. Something happens and you're just dropped in a spot. Sometimes the spot is good. Usually you're kind of disadvantaged and you have to rise above it, and you just get dropped and you have to deal with it. And that's kind of how I felt about that game. It was like playing a game of Final Fantasy Tactics, whereas for me, my sweet spot with a tabletop role-playing game is taking advantage of the fact that we're not limited like computers are, and so we don't have to have all that stuff. All right, so this is some really good stuff, riffing on this article. Let's go to the other article. Got all this was posted. I know this one was posted recently. Let's see. Posted by or at the Grumpy Wizard blog. A message to 5e DMs. You only have one, ass, butt, whatever. So this was based on, I think if you missed the beginning of this chat, so this article was based on a tweet that was based on, they pulled out a screenshot from Reddit, and I guess the tweet got a lot of engagement on Twitter, and they kind of saw it and they wrote about it. So I want to let's start from the original. We only have the quote of the Reddit post. I could probably dig up the Reddit post if I were not as lazy as I am, but there it is. So this was posted to Reddit by someone who's called the Speaker of the Tree, I guess. And his title for his Reddit post, which is what I used in the title for the stream, is Punished for Role-Playing. So here's his story. Party got captured by a mob boss and his bandit dudes. We were all tied up on our knees. Mob boss says we're being taken to some cells, maybe get ransomed or interrogated. My character spits at him when he finished his monologue. DM tells me that he orders his men to kill me while I'm prone and tied up. I'm restrained and prone. They roll a few attacks with swords, hit me unconscious, then a few more times while I'm down, killing my character. DM says the mob boss doesn't like being disrespected. We were all level 3, and it was the first major fight that resulted in us getting captured. Guess I'll make a new character? DM says it's too bad because she liked my character and asks if she wants to let the party find a cleric to revive me. Well, then why did you kill her? And then there's an edit, which we can't see the whole part of, but first time player, first time session. So that's the original text that started this whole thing rolling. And then Paths Peculiar tweeted the picture of this saying you weren't quote unquote punished for role playing. You decided that your characters do something suicidal, and there were, in parentheses, very foreseeable consequences. Don't expect plot armor. So I have a lot to say on this, but let's read the article first. This is from Grumpy Wizard. It's called A Message to 5 EDMs, 5th edition DMs. You only have one, but earlier this week, there was a stupid argument happening on Twitter. Yes, I know, inconsequential arguments between people who couldn't find an open pit trap with a torchbearer and intent for polls what Twitter is for. While there were some reasonable people and some valid points, many of the tweets amounted to insane screeching that would shame a gibbering mouther. Now, they don't say what these posts were screeching about. I suppose I could look it up, but again, that's work. This particular argument came about when a mutual of mine commented on a Reddit post. Here's a relevant tweet. That's what we started with. Got a lot of engagement. Did the Dungeon Master make a bad call? My main thought, having read the original post, was the Game Master might have messed up, but not on the basic call. Spitting is on a violent criminal is something any reasonable person would assume to provoke a violent response. Find a gangster slinging drugs on the street corner in any city and spit on him. Tell me how that goes in the comments. Should the DM have killed the PC? Maybe. I don't know. Wasn't there. Not enough context. If one of my players did that, it might have ended the same way. I might have had the minions give the character a severe beating that put them within a few hit points of death. I'd make a reaction roll with a significant negative to decide if the boss just beat the PC or killed them outright. It would also depend on the NPC. A psychopath NPC or a hardcore thug with a reputation to maintain isn't going to tolerate that sort of disrespect. He can't allow that sort of thing and keep face. Regardless, it would not have been good for the character. Depending on the NPC, death would have been a possibility. I wouldn't have rolled to hit or damage. I would have narrated that the mob boss sticks a blade in the character's throat like Top Dollar kills Gideon in The Crow. Auto success, no save. The place where I think the DM clearly messed up was the information exchange. I feel very confident that my players are fully aware that if their characters were completely in the power of a high-powered NPC and then insulted them, the outcome would be unpleasant. A new player at my table would get a rundown of the situation they are in, the neighborhood reputation of the boss, and the possible outcomes before they got told, are you sure you want to do that? If they persisted with the spitting, roll a new character. Reading the post, it seems like the player was not aware their character was in mortal danger. The DM may not have informed the player that characters could die as a consequence of their choices. It wasn't necessarily a bad call to kill the character, but the original post indicates there was a disconnect between the player and the Dungeon Master. All right, I see you guys are putting a lot of stuff out there in the comments, or not, a few things. I'm going to just read all this first, and then we'll get into it, because I think there's a lot to unpack. You can't ride two horses. Reading the post, the tweet about the post, and the responses to the tweet about the post causes me to reflect that a lot of Dungeon Masters only have one ass but are trying to ride two horses. The sense I get from the original post on Reddit is the Dungeon Master put the characters in a pre-plotted encounter where no matter what they did, they were going to be captured. The PCs were brought to the boss who was going to give them an offer they couldn't refuse. I don't know for sure, but I'm willing to bet that this was a plot point for the DM's story. The player did something that felt like the kind of thing a brave protagonist hero would do in a movie. Player believed they were in a story. Whoever sold them on playing had probably told them that D&D was collaborative storytelling. The player assumed that this was a story wherein their character was one of the protagonists who wouldn't be killed unless it served the story. The player assumed the story was being played out as an interactive narrative and they acted accordingly. The error comes when the DM tries to ride the storytelling horse and the playing a game horse at the same time. She decided the correct game response was to kill the character, which confused the player. The player thought they were in a story when suddenly they were in a game with constraints and rules. You tell a story or you play a game. When you try to do both, it creates problems. All right, horse number one. Actually, let me take a drink of lukewarm tea for the working man. Horse number one. I'm telling my story. You can't swing a dead tabaxi sorcerer without hearing the word story in discussions of 5th edition D&D. This approach suggests the DM or designer will produce predetermined plot points, cutscenes, and scripted boss fights, very much like the design of a computer RPG. The players get to fill in the details of how they get to the final boss fight, but it is assumed that the players will follow the breadcrumbs and fight the boss. It is assumed that even if the players deviate from the primary storyline, they will return to the plot at some point and complete the adventure as intended by the DM or designer. When you ride the quote-unquote story horse, the plot points, story beats, and ultimate climactic battle of the campaign, which has been predetermined, is the criteria by which the DM makes all decisions. Anything that doesn't conform to the story or can be shoehorned into the story cannot be allowed. When you are riding the story horse, the players will not decide to join forces with the bad guy because he's right. The Harpers are a bunch of stuck-up douchebags. At no point will the players decide, F this, I'm a first-level adventurer, and those dragons up there, we're going where there aren't any dragons. Players will never say, F 10 towns, it's too damn cold up here, let's go back to Waterdeep and steal some ish. We are going to engage with the DM story because that is what we are supposed to do. There was another recent Twitter fight where many DMs said they let combat go on as long as it felt dramatic. When the feeling of the table started to turn and the players started getting bored, the villain monster would die and on to the next scene. The players might have felt like they were playing a game, but in reality they were enacting a story beat with a predetermined ending. The combat wasn't actually a fight. It was like a roller coaster. It was intended to give you the experience of danger without your character actually being in danger. The DM rolling dice was to give the illusion that it was a fight. This is an extreme example of riding the story horse. That kind of makes sense. If you were going to ride that horse, you might as well go all the way. Many, perhaps most, players of the current edition like these sorts of campaigns. Horse numero dos. We are playing. The older horse you can ride is the game horse. Dungeons & Dragons is a game. It's a particular type of game but it is a game. One feature of games is uncertain outcomes. In board games or card games, the possible outcomes are limited. In chess, we know that white wins, black wins, or there will be a draw. We don't know which it will be. That's why we play the game, to find out. The choices the players make determine the outcome. When you ride the game horse, you allow the rules, procedures, and mechanisms to determine what happens. The players may think, and sometimes will say, well, the DM dropped this clue here, so he must want us to go to the bandit's lair to release the prisoners. The DM riding the game horse doesn't care where you go or what you do as long as you do something that is interesting. They didn't write a story, they designed a situation. Engage with it how you like, be a hero, be a scoundrel, be a murder hobo, it's all fine. Can't ride both horses at the same time. My hypothesis is that the DM in the Reddit post that found its way to trying to ride two horses despite having one ass. She had a story to tell. A mob boss captures the party, makes them an offer they can't refuse so that they are motivated to go to the next plot point of the adventure. She was also trying to play a game. The PC insulted the mob boss and the NPC's reaction was to kill the character. When you try to do both of these things at the same time, you get confused and angry players. They think they are the protagonist in your story, but they find out they are pawns on the chessboard and can be sacrificed. No wonder the player was confused. D&D is all about collaborative storytelling. Many of the comments in the ensuing Twitter battle resulting from the screen capture are built this rarely explored underlying presence. It is unassailable doctrine in the minds of many GMs of the quote-unquote new school. On nearly every social media site, blog posts, nerdy websites, and news media sites, we get the rejoinder, D&D is all about collaborative storytelling. I can't say that I have ever agreed. The longer I play, the more I come to dislike it. Judging from my observations of the most popular 5e blogs, YouTube channels, and threads on social media, the interactive narrative style is dominant. Most people call this collaborative storytelling. Almost no one defines what collaborative storytelling actually is or describes how to do this effectively using the D&D mechanisms as the engine. I searched on Google for collaborative storytelling Dungeons & Dragons. What I found was interesting. I assume that I assume that a definitive, concise, authoritative definition of collaborative storytelling on at least one of the popular sites dedicated to D&D, and I didn't find one. What I found was a lot of references to it, but no one describing what they meant by that term or how they achieved it other than to go into a tautology. D&D is collaborative storytelling is D&D. There are many iterations of collaborative storytelling as the core of Dungeons & Dragons, but nothing describing what they actually mean by that. I love tearing into an assumption to find out what makes it work, and imagine my surprise when one of the most common assumptions of 5e fandom is an empty box. What I find incredibly bizarre is the degree to which quote-unquote new school players and DMs focus on the game mechanics and how to build a character. I see frequent posts on various sites about how this character isn't optimal for combat, and if you combine this race with this class and these backgrounds, you have this ability to do whatever. Players want to roll persuasion, intimidation, exsanguination to get a better deal on ale in the tavern, and then declare they prefer role-playing over role-playing ROLE, playing over role-playing ROLL playing. If your DM is fudging the dice and making sure the combat is dramatic, if your DM isn't going to kill the characters unless it serves the story, aren't going to go off the breadcrumb trail because that is where the adventure is, then why roll dice at all? Why bother with the build? The two approaches are contradictory. Why not play a story game? Why not write a character background, hand it to the storyteller, and have them tell you what happens in the story? You could sit at the table and improv how you got there. That's what's happening when the DM rides a story horse. It looks and feels like a game, but it really is interactive narrative with predetermined outcome that you have to solve like a puzzle. One area where I agree with the designers who come out of the Forge and quote story game unquote scenes is that D&D is ish for telling stories. Dungeons & Dragons is a game that creates stories. You aren't telling the story, you are creating the story. This is a subtle but important difference. your life so safe that you have never been close to death? Did you plan that near-death is happening when you left your apartment that morning? Did you think, I need to make a story about saving someone's life? I think I'll live a story where I saved someone from killing themselves this morning. You weren't telling a story when that person nearly stepped into traffic because they were too busy looking at their phone. When you grabbed them from behind, just a garbage truck came roaring by. You weren't telling a story, you were experiencing an event. You were in a situation, you made a decision, you took an action. That action had an outcome, and then when you got home, you told your roommate the story. You didn't plot the story out before you left, you experienced an event which created a story. He has a quote here. In my videos, I deliberately shy away from storytelling. I have an entire video saying, do not try and tell a story. Build an adventure. Let the story take care of itself. Because in my experience, those who put story first are going to be very frustrated with D&D and the fact that it cooperates not at all with your goals. But those who put adventure first have a ton of fun rolling dice and killing stuff. They'll spend an hour in the parking lot after talking about stuff like, man, what if we never opened that door? What would have happened? Should we have tried to negotiate with this dude? These are not people talking about a story they just created. They're talking about a scenario they just played. From Matt Colville. There's I'm just scrolling down because my tongue's getting tired. Emergent narrative, or I have no effing idea how we got here. In tabletop role-playing games played in the style I prefer, the outcome is unpredictable. I am only riding horse number 2, the game horse. I do create and tell stories, but they are the stories of the setting, the monsters, and the NPCs that occurred before the campaign began, or things that happen in parallel to what the players are doing, so that I can create a sense of sekaikan for the players. I don't know what sekaikan is. Maybe someone can illuminate that for me. That isn't me telling the player character story. That's different. The PC story is created. It emerges through play. Another tea. Get a little, get a little fluid back in my mouth. Okay. I started my Hogwater campaign in the summer of 2018. I had no idea that the players would form a mercenary company, sack 2 cities, kill the Grand Druid, become potent servants of chaos, build their own city, travel to the plane of limbo, and kill a demigod. I had no idea that any of that would happen, but it did. All I knew was that the first level adventuring party had washed up in an ishy little town on the borderlands. The Lord was a drunk and incompetent. There were some bandits, a couple of dungeons, some monsters layered up in some nearby ruins. The local druids were a-holes. The innkeeper had an interesting secret, and the lord of the neighboring domain had intended to invade and take the joint over. Seriously, I didn't know much more than that. And then we get a little map showing Hogwater. This was the first map I made for my Hogwater campaign. This was it, all of it. We played off this map for a couple of months before I had to expand it. Why? We were playing a game. It had an uncertain outcome. The players made choices, and these choices had consequences for good and for ill. I did not have a plot. I did not have a story to tell. I had some ideas. I had situations. I had some dungeons that I bought. Things I stole from blogs, and a cruddy map that took about 15 minutes to draw. That's it. 30 months and all kinds of mayhem later, we had a complete campaign. Dozens of stories that we are still telling friends and new players at the table. Just the other day, my 80-year-old mother-in-law, who has never played D&D in her life, was laughing about some ridiculous story I told about something my players had gotten up to in that campaign. I didn't intend for it to go that way. I had no idea it would happen that way, but it did. I guess we're getting finally to the conclusion. Ride the game horse or ride the story horse. If you want to run an interactive narrative for your players and they like that sort of thing, go for it. A lot of people are into it. If you're one of those people, awesome. You do you. Not my preference at all. You might want to communicate to your gamer group that you are telling your story, and that will be the basis upon which you will be making your rulings. You should also keep it foremost in your own mind that you are telling a story so that you can make decisions according to the imperative of the story. If you try to ride both horses and make a decision that doesn't fit the story but does match up with the game rules, the players are going to get angry and confused. The outcome will be incoherent. Personally, I'm going to ride the game horse, and you can too. There's nothing in the game mechanisms that prevent you from running 5th edition the way I run Swords and Wizardry. You'll almost certainly have better stories to tell after the game is over than you will if you try to create the story before the game's. A 5th edition DM can create a setting, populated with monsters, gods, and NPCs. The Dungeon Master can give those beings their own intents, resources, obstacles, and enemies. Players interact with that stuff, make choices, and throw the ball back to the DM. The DM decides how the monsters, gods, and NPCs react and inform the players. Back and forth it goes. The paradox is that this approach usually ends up with much better stories that emerge from these interactions than the pre-scripted nonsense Wizards of the Coast sells and DMs are constantly urged to create. And then hat tip 2. Does that go back to the twist? Okay. And then he mentions some inspirations, Paths Peculiar and Aaron the pedantic. Okay, so there's a lot of stuff happening in the chat, relatively speaking. Let me try to hit through some of these things. Brian Smith says, a lot of other options that could have been taken, but well, that's certainly one way of doing it. I'd prefer take this one elsewhere. I've got something special planned for them. Yeah, so my first thing is, let me see, let me just read some more of these comments first. But yes, Brian Smith says, not a bad call, in my opinion, not my favorite, but in the moment, sure. Linkian says, that sucks, shouldn't have killed this character outright, should have inflicted some damage, declare a painful death, and drag him to the torture room where there's suddenly a chance for escape. Hey, Down Rossaville snuck in here while I was reading. Hey, Down Rossaville. Dave Mills, who the hell are the Harpers? They're Forgotten Realms people. Okay, we got people reacting to the interactive storytelling, but you tell somebody it's a game, they see somebody asking them what their elven eyes see, and they're like, what? Okay, here we go on Sekaikan. Hopefully I'm not destroying the pronunciation like I usually do. Linking says the most common translation is worldview. It's a term that's often used by all kinds of Japanese authors, creators, whether it's video games, manga, anime, books, or movies. Okay. All right. Yeah, this was a long. I appreciate a lot of what he was saying. Some people are talking about how long this thing, right? It was long, and if I was reading it to myself, it probably wouldn't have felt as long. It really is something when you start reading this stuff out loud. I think for the word count, and I think I'm fighting a little bit of a cold, so it makes it a little bit tough. So I have a lot, or I feel like there is a lot to unpack. First of all, I think I follow Paths Peculiar on Twitter. Nothing against them, but I kind of feel like there's this thing. If we have this is what my character would do. I feel like this thing that Paths Peculiar is saying, and this is the original post from, we go back to the Reddit post that started this whole deal. Paths Peculiar posted, says, hey, you weren't punished for role-playing. You decided your character should do something suicidal, and there were very foreseeable consequences. Okay, so I want to start there for a minute. I don't necessarily disagree in the most general sense of, yes, actions meet consequences. Hello. But I do want to say, in the player's defense, okay, what are we playing here? All right, let's boil it down. What are we playing here? We are not playing like the blog author says, well, go to a gang boss, spit on him, see what happens. But that's not the game we're playing. Even if you want to say, this does not even have to do with story versus, what are the two? Story versus game. This has to do with, we're playing sword and sorcery games, something like that. We're playing something that is not trying to model the reality of the street in real life. We're trying to model essentially the street in the reality of games and popular culture, our ideas of fantasy medieval landscape. Okay, so how a drug lord or a bum or whomever, a crazy guy in the real world will react to it is as far away from the point as anything else. This is, you're imagining yourself as a Conan type character, a Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser type character, a Robin Hood, a Jane from Firefly, a character like that, and is spitting when somebody captures you, hogties you, tells you they're going to torture them. Could you see Mal in an episode of Firefly getting captured and tortured, not spitting on somebody? You absolutely would. What happens? There are consequences. Does someone have to jump to the most extreme consequence ever to make a point? No, they don't. Do they have to do it to this guy who's first session, doing something that is in character? Sure, yeah, I can say, as the GM, I can say, well, I'm justified. If you spit on a drug dealer, they might stab you. They could also punch you. They could also, like someone said, take you to the torture room, show you what for. They were going to take you to the torture room anyway. So what difference does it make? They might even like your moxie. They might say, oh, I like your spirit. I mean, how many movies, how many TV shows, how many books have you read where somebody spits on someone and the guy takes it, the guy licks it, the guy chuckles, ha ha ha, the guy punches him in the gut. We're not, this idea that you have to jump to the one consequence. Like, yeah, this is what my character would do from the GM side. You have all these possibilities of things. You're going to pick the one extreme one that ruins this poor guy's session. That is a solution. And I can't just say it would never happen, because sure, it might. But there's a whole lot of other things you could do that could help build things up, be just as true to the character and be a lot more interesting than just we killed him. And yes, I do agree. You don't need to roll to do all that. I mean, why are you even rolling all that stuff, out? Dave Mills says, come on, cut out the tongue. Yeah, probably a little bit extreme. Probably a little bit extreme, maybe two. You could cut off a finger. I mean, I would just would have gone with punching him in the gut. Maybe taking them and knocking them unconscious with some extra torture. I don't know. There's a whole lot of things you can do, but killing the guy, is it defensible? Yes, it's defensible in the same way that this is what my character could do, is sometimes defensible. So you look at it and go, guess what? There's a whole spectrum of choices out there, and you pick the worst of the lot, the one that's the least interesting. Killing the guy outright for that is the least interesting. And it's the guy's first day, and he's clearly into it. This isn't like the guy's on his phone, not paying attention. So the GM's like, hey, buddy, this is happening. I'm just checking the scores. Hey, buddy, this is happening. I'm just checking the scores. So the GM goes, okay, I'm killing you. No, the guy is clearly invested. So, and yes, it doesn't have to be the protagonist of the story, but you're supposed to, I do think there's this concept of, you treat them like, again, you're playing in the world of these characters. And in those kind of stories, they don't get, Conan kills half the city guard, gets finally taken prisoner, gets held before the king or the lord or whatever. That lord would perfectly have within their rights just to kill Conan right there. All right, you killed half the city guard. We all saw it. You still got their blood on you. Just slit his throat. He's done. No, it's Conan, or it's somebody who might be Conan. Or the guy looks at him and goes, wow, you've got some kind of potential. I seen you, so I'm going to use you for a higher purpose. I imagine if whether it was a story or whether it was a game, the mob boss was capturing them to use them for a purpose. Them spitting on you, showing some character, showing some mustard, showing a little spine. You might say, hey, man, I like that. I'm going to have to beat you up for it. Maybe I got to take off a finger for it. But I like that mustard, man. You showed me something. So, I feel like on that score, I can't totally get behind the, oh, yeah, man, totally. Because that's not the kind of game I'm trying to play. People say, hey, what are we trying to play? This is not, I'm trying to play realistically. What would the cartels do if you showed up? We're playing a fantasy medieval game. And even if I'm not a knight, even if I'm only third level, so I'm some low guy on the totem pole, it's all about kind of, I don't know, being a somewhat interesting character who has a potential. And if you look at all the stories, characters are allowed to get away with stuff in fiction and things a little bit. So you give them a leeway, give them some consequences, just give them more interesting consequences. Lots of things to do. Terrence says, Conan, I demand to speak to my lawyer. Yeah, exactly. Now Nothing says, boy, I disagree with a lot of that. My game isn't trying to mimic a movie or book. It's trying to mimic a false reality. An RPG's own art form shouldn't be trying to be a movie or book. I'm not saying you're trying to mimic, nothing. I am not saying you're trying to mimic a particular book. What I'm saying is, what is the false reality that you're trying to mimic? To me, it's this in our imaginations of what these places are like, not the real life of our real life. It's not about you trying to be a particular movie, though it could be. Some people do. They play Conan. We're playing in Dune. We're playing. When you go into a setting that's already established, you're playing that, or you're creating a setting. What I'm trying to say is that the kinds of stories, the kind of things we're doing is not. I don't know many games. Maybe you're playing in Hardmaster or something where you're literally trying to be. I am playing in 13th century France, and so we're going to die of dysentery. The pox is coming. This kind of thing. But no, we're generally playing in kind of in the shared realities that we're making are based upon all this cultural fabric. And that cultural fabric is not really what would happen in the real world. Because in the real world, all these stories, all these things would just fall apart. Because the real world, people react differently. In the real world, they just kill you. The real world would just... like they say, they did a good job with this in Goodfellas. When they kill, what's his name's character, they shoot him in the back of the head. They don't talk to him. There's no speeches. There's no monologues. They just kill him, right? But we have all these stuff in our games because they fit into that cultural fabric that we're all drawing on. The myths, the legends, all this stuff. It's not about a particular game. So maybe that changed your mind whether you agree with me or not. But hey, if you disagree with me, you disagree with me. That's cool. I'm all right with that. Brian Smith says, sounds like the DM in that tense moment didn't consider the multitude of cool things that could happen and just ended it. Yeah, this is where I get that kind of, and I think that happens with GMs. They go like, oh, really? Like you did this thing, and now I'm going to bring the worst consequence down on you. But yeah, it's just a missed opportunity because I would assume that everybody can think of other consequences, and all these other ones that you guys mentioned in this chat here, they're all more interesting than just killing the guy, which is kind of a buzzkill. Okay, you kill the guy, like, yeah, cut off a finger, sure, cut out their tongue, probably maybe a little bit harsh, but sure, all those things have interesting things going forward. Just saying, okay, you're dead, and now the party can resurrect you. What's interesting about that? And like, for me, I want to think of, in the realm of all these things that could happen, which ones rise to the top and which ideas fade down. I want the ones that I feel like are the most interesting, the most fun, while being true to the context. And that just seemed like, I don't know. Brian Smith says new player, but maybe new DM too. Maybe. I mean, it's certainly, if we look on the other side, right? The GM, the player says stuff like, "Hey, we're only level 3. This is my first time." I do see, you can see the seeds in there of somebody thinking like that. I'm not supposed to die right yet. This is not supposed to be a death situation. The death situation should be at the end of this whole scenario, not at the beginning, which is definitely an expectation mismatch. There's one DM saying, "Hey, you can die at any moment," and this guy's thinking, "But man, I'm only level 3. I just started today. You're going to kill me off in the first session? Like, impossible." That's definitely an expectations thing. Might have been a session 0 thing that might have been discussed more. The one thing is, with a lot of new players, and if this was a new DM, sometimes you don't know what you should be talking about in those session 0, so you might not cover the fact of, hey, I'm going to take serious consequences for your serious actions, kind of thing. So we're gonna do that, right? But I just think that, going back to something, I think you want to create a shared reality with your players. And clearly the GM and the player had a different reality. But I feel like when I see this stuff happen in these games, where I see players want to step up and they want to really embrace really a little bit of a larger than life persona. Like, I had a game a long time ago, I was running a game. I was playing in a sci-fi game. The GM wanted to take a break, so I took over and I played essentially a short campaign of Dungeons and Dragons. And one of the players, he played a guy, and it was kind of in the penultimate or getting close to the end, and they weren't in a good spot, but he wanted to challenge this guy to single combat. Like, like, I challenge you. Like, I think he was, if I remember, he was really influenced by the Chronicles of Riddick movie, where Riddick, sees the guy who killed Keith David's character, and is like, I want a piece of him, kind of thing, and they get to fight in just a real world scenario. Why would this guy do that? Like, they're basically captured. You could kill them, but I see this guy like trying to really embrace this character, be like, no, I want you. So we did it, and he fought, and it's just a cool thing, to do. In the same way, when I see this guy, it kind of really trying to get in the character and doing this, kind of make a moment like this for themselves, I can either look at that and kind of embrace it, or I can like smack him down with reality's hammer. They're both, I can build up equally good reasons for each one, but if I got to choose the choice between just smacking someone down with reality's hammer or raising them up and letting them have a moment that fits in the context of everything, why not let them have a moment? I don't know. Why not? What's the harm? I think it makes it for a better time. Fluff the Griffin says the DM sounds like a newbie. I won't lie. I've been there and did some dumb stuff to my players. Yeah, it's just a little over. I think it's just harshness, right? It says, why does my character sheet have a feel for save versus dysentery? Yes, indeed. I mean, yeah, like, hey, here comes the plague. Everybody roll. You're going to die when you're 30. Yeah, we could play that, right? But I don't think that's what most people are thinking about when they say, hey, we're going to play D&D. Okay, like, how often do I have to save versus childbirth just to get out of the womb? Am I going to start out as a serf and I have to spend my first 40 years trying to work my way out of servitude? No, right? So, but it's look, you set the ground rules of your setting, and I do want to play Harn, or at least I imagine Harn to be kind of more really gritty like that. But if that's not the game you signed up for, then I don't think it's fair to tell the players like, no, you do that, and this is what, it's like everything's got to match up. But I will die on the hill of, yes, you can defend killing that PC in that circumstance, but I won't say it was the right move, or really the move that should have been done. Bob Mostel says, I say it's a situation where the GM and the player need to have a talk about their genre expectations because they weren't on the same page. Trust and understanding takes time to develop. Absolutely. And yeah, and it's something that if you're a new GM, you don't really know to explain it. You might not even know what your expectations are necessarily as a new player. You probably don't. We don't know where they were coming from on these things. But yeah, this could have been a much different. I mean, in this case, it seems like the maybe a lesson was learned. I don't know, maybe not. I guess we'll have to see. Dave Mills says, "I wish the real world would just stop hassling me." Exactly. DM could still save it, resurrect them, just do it again. Yeah. Now, nothing says there's not enough background to know if the death was quote unquote good. My thinking is if a DM sets up something as if you do X, you will die. If a player does X, they need to die or nothing feels real. Yes, but I don't. So we don't know, right? Now, nothing. Whether there's something was set up as if you do this into the blank, you will die. I think that's where that shared context comes up. And like I said, judging at all the things that we read in popular fiction, in everything about the kinds of characters that we're trying to play, that spitting in the face as after you've been captured, you're already antagonistic. You've been captured. Should there have been a consequence? Absolutely. I think having no consequence would have been that, like, okay, it's not going to feel real if the guy just doesn't respond, if he's like a robot and just does nothing. But did it have to be killing the person? I think there's a lot of other choices there. And as other people pointed out, you could give them reminders. If you cut off their little finger, so the rest of this character's career, they've got one less finger on their hand. And, you could even reinforce it when they're in the tavern, they're getting a drink. Someone goes, "Hey man, what happened to your pinky finger?" Or maybe they know him in this local town. Maybe this is what that mob boss does when people cross him for the first time, like a thief. Thief in certain cultures, certain laws, you get your hand cut off or something. If this guy cuts off the fingers of people who wrong him the first time, the second time is death, but the first time is you lose a finger, then you got a whole lot of stuff from it without, I think, dashing your reality. If the earlier in that scene, which we don't have, the GM as the mob boss says, you either do exactly what I say or I'm going to kill you, and the guy does something else, then yes, I think the GM in a sense has boxed themselves in having to say, well, I got to kill you now. But again, I think there's a lot of choices you could make that I think will keep reality where it is, keep that sense of shared reality. This obviously, even though it wasn't intended to, this broke it as much as anything else, because obviously the reality for the player and the GM wasn't confirmed by this choice. Maybe the other players would have said, "Oh yeah, that's the world," right? But this player, it broke it. So, hopefully the GM, I don't know if they saw this thread because they obviously weren't called out in a name that they would recognize, but hopefully the GM might learn from this too. Lincoln says, like I said in my teens, I was obsessed with trying to make everything feel real. Right. But it's a kind of that real to what, right? Real to like real, or real to like, hey, we're, I don't know, like Lord of the Rings real, or real to whatever shared setting real. And it's a hard thing. And there's, this is where session 0 and the stuff becomes, and the self knowledge, because that's the kind of the biggest challenge when you're getting in a game, right? Is coming to grips with what is the real for everybody. And yes, ultimately our reality is the basis for everything. Everything is some magnitude or some degrees off of our real. And the more grittier and the more hardcore you get, the closer down to our real that you get. But we're all some deviations away. No one's playing absolutely real. Like, I don't know what led up to this capturing, but presumably if you go in the real world and you get into a fight with the mob, they're not tying you up to give you a job or something. They're just going to kill you, unless, that's talk about the real. There's no tying up and now we're going to do this. It's like, no, they're going to shoot you and they're going to dump you in the Pine Barrens somewhere, or tie you up and throw you in the ocean in cement barrels. So, it's the establishment of what is for everybody the real is super important. Brian Smith says, if the situation were different and were clearly labeled lethal trap than the player messed up with, then yeah, death. Trickier with an NPC social scene. Yeah, and I think the thing is too, is for that player, especially a new player, I could just see the kinds of touchstones that they might be going after, how they're trying to portray themselves, what it means to try to portray to this mob boss guy that you're tough, or that you're someone to be taken seriously, or you're not afraid of them, whatever. We see this all the time in movies with people spitting on each other or whatever, and kind of how it's perceived. And I think this person was trying to kind of channel some of that energy a little bit. And clearly in this game, that was a mistake. You know, oh goodness, Save versus Morning Breath weapon done. Yeah. That's getting rough. Nothing says that's the game I run. Players are more scared of a dead body infected with the bloody pox than an ogre. Yeah, well, if that's your game, then absolutely. Ovaltine Patrol says the arthritis bell curve table. Yep. Well, lots of good stuff in here. That's right. Terrence says you'll never wear that tacky pinky ring in my town again. Absolutely. Get that out of here. Ovaltine Patrol says there was a 90s comic vigilante called X. Crooks got a slash as a warning for the first offense. Second offense, he fished the job. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you could do with the mob boss and that kind of thing. Like I said, I think they had choices, and I think it's easy to jump on the poor player. Well, you spit it on mob boss. What do you think that would happen? And I go, I don't know. If I've watched The Godfather and I've watched these other movies, like lots of things can happen. Like, you watch, there's all kinds of movies where people spit on other people, or books I've read, or things, or TV, whatever. Like, I don't know. Like, it's not a done deal. It's not like I'm jumping off the moon and heading to Earth. What'll happen? Like, it's some kind of like, well, this is absolutely what's going to happen. Lots of weird stuff happens, especially if you get into the kind of idiosyncratic characters that get filled. Fantasy games are filled with these kind of characters. Like, just, you could really have fun with that, ramp it up. Like, there's just lots of stuff to do. Another thing's going to say versus poison / death ray. Yep, could be. Brian Smith says the baddies drink tea with their pinkies held high, probably showing their allegiance to the mob boss. Exactly. Like, could you imagine if to get into some mob place you had to show both your hands to show you had both your pinkies, and you could only get in if you had both your pinkies. I mean, I'm just thinking this stuff out. And granted, this is really hard to come up with in the moment a lot of times, and I get it. For that GM, especially if they're a newer GM, they feel like they've been called on the carpet, right? That you're trying to set up this authority figure, and the player does this thing and just undermines, or has the potential to undermine this whole situation you're trying to build up, which certainly would lead into this. I feel like if it is your story and this mob boss is going to be super important and everything, and you really have a lot of stake in that internally as a GM, and then this character comes in and kind of just undercuts you, that you feel like you have to just go to 11, which I think is what happens a lot. Like when someone will say something to the king and then they just get killed. The king's guard rushes in and kills you. And you're like, what? Oh, I can't have you insult the king. The king is this important character. Well, slow your roll, right? Have them torture them. And they were going to get tortured anyway. So just have them torture them, take them aside, cut off their tongue, cut off their pinky, but it's hard to come up with that stuff in the moment. And I think someone mentioned before, it's especially when you're starting out, it can be very easy to get caught up in just this, the rush or the adrenaline. And you think that like, oh gosh, I got to do something. I got to come in heavy because, like I said, this character's undermining everything I'm trying to do with this mob boss character. So I gotta Hulk smash them, and it goes, awry. Bob Mossel says, and in the end, the poster and the GM seem young. It is at day's end just a game, and they should talk it over, come to a compromise both can live with, and get on with their lives. Yeah, I mean, I think that unfortunately, I think this person was posting it to Reddit. A lot of people will post to Reddit. They're really looking for kind of guidance, either A, guidance, or B, kind of reassurance. I did this. Did I do the right thing? Was this okay? Right? The kind of am I the a-hole kind of post, right? I did this. Was that fine? Whatever. Or they did this. Like, for someone new, they're like, well, this happened. They don't have any other experience with D&D. It's their first game, their first character. Is this right? Is this wrong? What did I walk into? Am I playing the right game? Like, what's going on? And they're asking, and stuff can just get kind of blown to smithereens. And unfortunately, one of the victims ends up being this poor person who just was trying to get a little guidance or support or something. Bob Monson says, if they get on the same page as what genre they're playing, then some of the problems should go away. Yeah, absolutely. I just hope that it doesn't end up being like they forget about it. Like the DM doesn't really take into consideration that the players seem to be blindsided by this. And who knows if the other players in the party also felt blindsided, or if it's just this one person because they're new. I mean, was the first session, so maybe the other players were new too, right? So hopefully, if it's something that gets, obviously it got whatever attention it got in the role playing social media abroad, but I hope that locally in that game it gets settled. Now, I'm already at the top of the hour. A couple of interesting things about the article. I not that I disagree with anything this article's saying. I am definitely, I think if you've been in here and you're subscribed and you've seen my videos, right? I'm definitely a game. I am a horse playing the game Horse Rider to the end. I think I've even had videos saying like, your story's not that great. Stop trying to. You think you're telling some amazing story, you're not, kind of thing. All that kind of stuff that they're talking about. But Brian Smith does say, how awkward must it have been if the guards were missing their hit rolls? Yeah, I don't know why you would do that. It's just torture. But I that makes me also that maybe the GMs knew because they were literally rolling out all these attacks and stuff. You don't need to roll coup de grace. It's over. If that's what you want to do, yeah, it's over. I do think that maybe there's a. When I was thinking about this over, I was thinking, false dichotomy a little bit. This idea that you can't ride both horses at the same time, I'm sorry, but you probably can. And the fact that so many people are doing it in the 5th edition space, and I don't know, things like Critical Role, I don't know how much of their stuff's all planned out versus all whatever, but you can definitely, look, I am a game, right? D&D is a game. We're going to roll dice to find out what happens, but I think it would be irresponsible for me to claim that people haven't been able to integrate having some kind of story control with having some game stuff built in. Is it the way I like to play? No, it's not I would agree with them. My favorite way to play is to really go with set up a scenario, let the emergent storylines emerge, riff off what the character's doing, do that stuff. But am I going to say that you can't do both at the same time? No, you can. Is it a balancing act? Yes. As Terrence said, trick riding is the world's oldest circus act. Indeed, I feel like you can, and I feel like lots of people do. And I think if I were to say, "Oh no, you can't," I think I would be undermining. I think a lot of people who run perfectly fine games that manage to bring in player choice, player consequences, emergent stories within the framework of a more stringent, overarching story than maybe is my favorite game. I think you can do both. I think people have demonstrated you can do both. It's kind of like, if you want to look at it, I don't want to use the railroad term, but it's a good one in the sense that it's, how wide is the gauge of your railroad, right? So if you imagine that and its narrowest gauge, you're locked in. And I look at it this way. I guess the way I'm looking at it is like, if you look at the railroad, not as you're on the set of tracks, but as the width of the road you're on, and your choices are how much within that road you can do your own thing. In an open world, the whole world, in a perfect sandbox, the whole world is your open road. You can go anywhere you want, do anything you want. You can inject story or have that overarching story framework, and you can narrow that road. But you can still have it fairly wide. Give a lot of choice. In, say, Lord of the Rings, we have this overarching story. Hey, Fellowship, you're starting from Rivendell. You got to get the ring to Mount Doom, and you got to do these other things, and you have to do them. That's the story, right? You got to do that. But within there, how do we want to get there? Oh, we got a lot of choice. We can go down to Rohan. That'll have consequences. Okay, we can go through Moria. That'll have consequences. Okay, we could go this. They could go theoretically. If you're playing that game as opposed to reading the book, you can. Here's the map of Middle Earth. You got to get to Mount Doom, choose your way. You got a lot of latitude. Is there still an overarching story? Yes, but you got a lot of latitude. Or you could do something that's a lot narrower, like, say, Ravenloft and some of those modules from that time, like the Dragonlance stuff, where you're very narrow and you can just ping pong a little bit, but basically you're just being pushed forward. So at its most narrowest point, sure, you can't have the story and the game parts interacting so much because you're fixed. But when you add some width in there, you can build in that latitude. And I think a lot of people do that, and a lot of people like that. So I think saying that you can't a little bit, maybe a little bit overstated, a little bit of trying to make a false distinction, I think. Terrence says, I don't believe in the existence of coherent DMing philosophies. Everybody lies about this, but if you aren't lying, you aren't DMing. To be a DM is to be a liar. Is that what you're saying, Terrence? Don says, 5e can be deadly and gritty. Gritty just ask my players. Yeah, I think the one thing I will say on the grittiness scale is I think it's, at what point is the system fighting you, if that's what you want to do, versus helping you? So if I was going to run a super heroic adventure in an old school game, let's just say BX, I could do that, but I would have to make a ton of changes. I'd want to make more lenient death saves. I'd want to make more superpowered powers. I want to do a whole lot of stuff. I wouldn't want just save or die type mechanics, right? I'd want something more superheroic. So I would say the system, just vanilla, is kind of fighting me, and I'd have to make a lot of changes to the system. 5th edition, I can make it gritty and everything, but I feel like it does fight me a little bit. Now, it's not really a problem if I wouldn't mind taking, say, BX and making a heroic game afterwards. I just know I'd have some work to do. By the same token, I could take 5th edition and run a gritty, really just gritty, low magic kind of Takame, but I have to do some work to it. It's kind of how much work do I want to do to get it to where I want. And so in a perfect world, no, I wouldn't use 5th edition for my gritty game, but if my players all like and know 5th edition and they're not up to trying something else, then you try to make lemonade with your lemons. Brian Smith says, I tell my friends that they fight dragons. So yeah, that's a lie. They fight dungeons, they fight dragons. Brian Smith says, check out 5e hardcore mode. Yeah, I've checked those. Part of it too, though, is the power level. It's not even just, I think people get caught in like, well, I can do the gritty health thing where you're only rolling once a week or do stuff, and then of course you get people, oh, but then what happens to the casters and the people who get there who are long rest power versus short rest powers? Oh, the balance. Oh, and then okay, you can do that. Okay, you could just have you could say die at 0. Okay, but then the powers are still pretty powerful for what I think of when I like a gritty fantasy. So then you got to start tweaking those. And look, you can do it, right? For the kind of game I want, I think I'd have a lot more work than if I just pick something like, here's BX, and I can basically just run it as is. Oh, Nightbot stepping in. Bum, bum, bum. Oh, it's the all caps, Brian Smith. If you all caps on Nightbot smacks you down hard. Fluffy the Griffin says the character system gives anything the players want to the characters, so you have to artificially restrict a lot to keep them from running roughshod. Yeah, it's just the nature of their powers. Like it's the Goodberry problem. I don't necessarily have a problem with Goodberry. And a long time ago, I wrote a blog post saying like, hey, leave Goodberry alone. It's fine. There are other challenges. But at the same time, I understand if you're trying to make a really hardcore, gritty world, and then you got a druid who's just gets Goodberry as a cantrip. It's not even a first level spell. Cantrip, hey, Goodberry, everybody could just eat. Then that kind of, it could take a little out, right? If you have if your understanding of the Rangers, hey, you could never get lost ability, you make it super expansive. I argue it should not be that way, and I think it can work actually okay. But a lot of people take it to be just basically like the Ranger has internal GPS. Then that takes a lot of mustard out of some other things, and then there's eventually just gets a lot of different things. Can you fix it all? Sure. Can you work it a lot? Absolutely. But it might not be my first choice if I'm picking a particular system to run something, if I have that choice. But a lot of people don't have that choice, which is maybe disappointing. Nightbot just killed my character without warning. I'm going to post about it on Reddit. Yeah, Reddit, I mean, this is the thing. Unfortunately, the internet's a cruel place, and I feel a little bit for this person. Again, they were just looking for a little help and ended up creating some kind of firestorm they didn't mean to. And Terrence says, I want to create a spell called Gooderberry and dominate the cantrips market. Yeah, but you can only sell it once, right? That would be good. If you could rent, when are we going to get like different licensing for spells? Like pay as you cast? Is there a way to do that so you no longer own the spell? You merely own that particular memorization, so you got to pay for it over and over again? I mean, if we were remaking spellcasting in current world's models, it would be that, right? It would be that you only get that casting, and you got to go pay some more money, otherwise that spell doesn't reappear in your spell book. That would be the supreme magic user Jeff Bezos system. If your patron was Amazon, then that would definitely be it. Terrence says non-fungible thaumaturgy. Absolutely. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to end it on that point. Thanks for hanging out. If you didn't get a chance to comment in the chat, let me know your thoughts. I thought these were some two interesting articles, interesting takes on things, and I thought I would share. Ovaltine Patrol says end user license agreement ritual. Yep, you got to do it. You got to do it. Nothing says this was a great discussion. Much love. Don't worry, I'm on your side even if we disagree. Awesome. I don't actually think we disagree that much. Nothing. I think it's just that perspective on the reality bit. But yeah, it was fun. Thanks everybody. I will see you tomorrow on your way out. If you give a thumbs up, that would be awesome. Friday, I'm going to be traveling for PAX Unplugged. Not sure what time I'm leaving, so there's a small chance I might do a stream on Friday, but I might actually do it over there, and it might be a totally different time because I'm going to be, as my father would say, one man working alone at PAX Unplugged. So assuming that I can have the energy, I could stream at any time I want. But maybe tomorrow I'll do the Reddit roundup. I'm supposed to have my game tonight, but literally as I've been streaming, I've seen comments from my game's Discord, which leads me to believe, as I just peek down and see the notifications pop up, that people can't make it tonight. So I'm not hopeful that the game's going to be taking place. So assuming that doesn't happen, I won't have anything to recap yet again for another week going. Maybe we'll do the Reddit roundup tomorrow. And then we'll see what happens for Friday. But have a great rest of your day, night, whenever you're watching or listening to this, everybody. Game